I moved to Harlow Creek in the spring of 2019, and for a long time, a very long time, I thought it was the best decision I had ever made in my 34 years of living. I want to be clear about that, because what I'm about to write is going to sound unhinged, and I need you to understand that I am not an unhinged person. I'm a technical writer. I review software documentation manuals for a living. I drink my coffee black, I keep a budget spreadsheet, I call my mother on Sundays. I am, by every reasonable measure, a boring and sensible man. So when I tell you that something is wrong with Harlow Creek, something that I cannot explain and cannot prove but have felt in my marrow for the past several weeks, I need you to understand that I did not arrive at this conclusion easily. I arrived at it the same way I arrive at every conclusion, slowly, methodically, and only after the evidence became impossible to ignore. The neighborhood sits about 40 minutes east of Portland, Oregon, just far enough from the city to feel like a different world. It's one of those planned communities from the late 80s that was built to look like it had always been there, wide streets with mature oaks along the curbs, craftsman houses in muted blues and greens and grays, a little park with a duck pond at the center of it all. The HOA newsletter is called the Creek Gazette, and it comes on the first of every month, printed on cream-colored paper, smelling faintly of lavender. There are 6 pages. The longest article is always about the seasonal planting schedule. My house is on Birchwood Lane, number 47, a 2-bedroom with original hardwood floors and a kitchen I renovated the year I moved in. The backyard has a pear tree that drops fruit every September with a soft, heavy persistence that I used to find comforting. I paid $312,000 for it, which felt like a miracle by Portland area standards, and the realtor, a small woman named Patrice with very straight teeth and a gold name tag, told me I was getting in at the right time, that property values in the creek were only going up. She said it with a warmth that felt completely genuine. I remember thinking, as I signed the papers, that this was exactly the kind of place where people stayed forever. That thought does not comfort me the way it once did. The neighbors welcomed me immediately, which in my experience is unusual. In my previous apartment complex in northeast Portland, I had lived for 2 years next to a man whose name I never learned and whose face I can only vaguely reconstruct. Harlow Creek was different. The day the moving truck arrived, a Saturday in late April, still cool enough that my breath fogged in the morning air, there were 4 people waiting on the sidewalk with a covered dish and a bottle of Riesling. Margaret and Tom Ellery from number 45, a retired couple in their late 60s who kept an immaculate garden. Sandra Cho from across the street, a dental hygienist with a daughter in middle school. And Ray Dunleavy from number 49, a heavy-set man with a gray beard and kind eyes who would, over the following years, become the closest thing I had to a best friend in Harlow Creek. I remember the smell of that first day. The Ellery's dish was a green bean casserole, still warm, the top golden and crackling. Sandra had brought a lemon bundt cake. Ray pressed the wine into my hands and said, with total sincerity, "You're going to love it here, Daniel. We take care of each other." His name for me was always Daniel, never Dan, which I preferred and had never had to ask for. He just seemed to know. The years settled around me like sediment. I learned the rhythms of the neighborhood the way you learn the layout of a house you've lived in long enough, not by thinking about it, but by moving through it in the dark without bumping into anything. I knew that Margaret Ellery put out her recycling on Wednesday evenings, never Thursday mornings like the instructions said, because she preferred the bins empty by the time she had her morning tea on the porch. I knew that the Hendersons at number 53 had 2 rescue greyhounds that were terrified of the duck pond. I knew that the Patel's youngest, a boy named Ravi, practiced clarinet between 4 and 5 on weekday afternoons, and that the sound of it, slightly breathy, occasionally off-key, traveled down the block in the summer when everyone had their windows open. There were barbecues. There were progressive dinners that wandered from house to house. There were secret Santa exchanges at Christmas and pumpkin carving contests in October, judged by a rotating committee with very serious criteria. I won second place in 2021 with a design I had agonized over for 3 evenings. Margaret Ellery won first, and no one was surprised, and no one seemed to mind. That is the kind of place Harlow Creek was, the sort of place where losing gracefully was easy, because there was always next year, and next year was always coming, and the neighborhood was always the same. I'm trying to remember exactly when the feeling started. I think it was the barbecue on August 14th of this year, just 3 months ago, though it feels like a different life. Ray was manning the grill, turning chicken thighs with that same deliberate patience he applied to everything, and Sandra was mixing a pitcher of her famous strawberry lemonade, and Margaret was laughing at something Tom had said, and the evening was warm and golden in the way that August evenings in the Pacific Northwest sometimes are, as if the light itself is trying to apologize for 7 months of gray. It was, by any objective measure, a perfect evening. I had been standing by the fence, holding a beer I wasn't really drinking, watching the light move through the pear tree in my backyard, and for some reason, I still don't know exactly why, I thought of Jack Morrow. Jack had lived at number 56, the house directly across the street from mine. He was 28, a graphic designer who worked remotely, a quiet and pleasant presence who waved every morning from his porch and occasionally brought over extra sourdough when he'd gotten ambitious with his starter. We weren't close, but we were friendly in the way that good neighbors are friendly, genuinely glad to see each other, briefly, and not requiring anything more. He had a navy blue bicycle he rode on weekends and a ginger cat named Fig that sometimes sat in the front window. He had left, or so I was told, in early July. Gone to Seattle, someone said. Or maybe it was Boise. Something about a job, or a relationship, or just a change of scenery. I had not said goodbye, which I thought was strange, but people left without ceremony sometimes, and I had been busy with a deadline that week, and I had told myself I would text him once he was settled, and then I had not, and then it was August and I was standing by my fence remembering him. Whatever happened to Jack Morrow? I said, to no one in particular, but the question dropped into a small lull in the conversation, and everyone heard it. The silence that followed was brief, 2, perhaps 3 seconds, but it had a quality that I noticed even then, even before I was looking for things to notice. It was not the ordinary silence of people reaching for an answer. It was the silence of a room in which something has just been unplugged. Absolute. Textureless. Sandra's hand paused over the pitcher of lemonade, the ladle suspended in midair. Ray did not turn from the grill. Margaret and Tom both looked at the table. Then Sandra said, "Oh, speaking of lemonade, I've been trying a new ratio, more juice, less sugar, because Tom was saying he's watching his sugar anyway, right, Tom?" And Tom said, "Ha, well, doctor's orders," and Ray turned a chicken thigh, and the conversation moved on as if I had never spoken. I stood there for a moment, the beer warm in my hand, and told myself I had imagined the pause. People forget neighbors who move away. It's normal. The evening continued, and the chicken was good, and the lemonade was good, and I went home at 10 o'clock and went to bed and did not think about it again for another 2 weeks. What I thought about, in those 2 weeks, was the moving van. Or rather, the absence of it. I started the way I start any research project, with what I actually knew, not what I assumed. What I actually knew about Jack Morrow's departure was almost nothing. I had been told he was gone. I had seen his house occupied by new residents, a young couple named the Kims, who had arrived with the same warmth and ease that everyone arrived with in Harlow Creek, as if they had rehearsed it. But I could not, no matter how carefully I searched my memory, recall a moving truck. I have a home office with a window that faces Birchwood Lane. I work at that window for 8 to 10 hours a day. I see every car that comes and goes. I see the UPS driver and the mail carrier and the landscaping crews and the occasional lost delivery drone that mistake someone's chimney for a landing zone. I am, by the particular geography of my daily life, an inadvertent but comprehensive witness to the comings and goings of my street. And I could not recall a moving truck for Jack Morrow. I thought back further. There was a woman named Connie Beaumont who had lived at number 43, the house on the other side of the Elries, until about a year ago. She had been a schoolteacher, recently widowed, soft-spoken and careful with her words in the way that people are when they have recently been very sad. She had left, I was told, to live closer to her daughter in Sacramento. I remembered being told this. I did not remember a truck. Before Connie, there was a family, the Washingtons, at number 51 who had apparently relocated to the East Coast for work. Before that, a young man named Patrick something who had inherited the house from an uncle and never seemed entirely comfortable with the neighborhood before he apparently moved on to somewhere more suited to his personality. People came and went. That was normal. Cities breathed people in and out. I had simply never thought to notice the mechanics of the departures. I began to check the dates in my head, mapping the exits against my calendar, and what I found made something cold settle at the base of my spine. In 4 years, I had been aware of at least 8 people leaving Harlow Creek. Not one of them had left during daylight hours. Not one of them had left with visible preparation, no estate sale signs, no boxes stacked on the porch, no half-loaded trucks half-blocking the driveway. They simply were present and then were absent, overnight, like candles being snuffed, and by the following morning the houses were already occupied again, the new neighbors already waving, already knowing my name. I found the journal in my basement on the last Thursday of August. I had gone down to find a box of cable adapters I'd been looking for since spring, and I found them in a storage cubby behind the water heater, and behind the box of adapters was another box, smaller, cardboard softened with age and damp, sealed with tape that had dried and yellowed and partially separated. I almost left it there. I had work to do. Instead, I stood for a moment in the smell of the basement, concrete dust and old wood and something faintly sweet I had always assumed was the pear tree's roots, and opened the box. Inside was a leather journal with a cracked spine. Dark brown, the leather surface rubbed smooth in the places where hands had held it repeatedly. The name on the inside front cover was written in pencil, small and careful, E. Hart. The entries ran from March 2013 to September 2014, and they were ordinary for most of their length, grocery lists embedded in prose, observations about weather, complaints about a knee that wasn't healing right. Mundane and domestic and entirely human. The last entry was dated September 9, 2014. It was written differently from the others, the handwriting less careful, slightly larger, with a pressured quality as if the pen had been gripped harder than usual. For years here, it began. Came for the quiet and found it. More of it than I wanted. Tried to drive to Portland today for Sarah's birthday. Found reasons not to go while I was packing the car. Unpacked the car. Made tea. Sat on the porch. I have not left this neighborhood in 14 months. I have not spoken to Sarah in 11. I tell myself I will call. I keep the television off after 9. I have not been sleeping well. The sounds inside the walls are not pipes. I don't know what they are. They know when I've been talking about certain people. They know when I've been thinking about leaving. I don't know how they know. Margaret brought a pie yesterday. She stood at the door longer than she needed to. She has very nice eyes. Very warm. They don't blink as much as they should. I've started counting. 3 minutes, 12 blinks. I counted while she talked about the pie. Average is 15 to 20 per minute. Something is wrong here and I don't know who I can tell because they are all here and there is no one who is not from here. If you find this, don't say anything. Don't say any names. They don't like the emptiness. If you're not part of the landscape, you become fertilizer for it. I sat on the concrete floor of my basement for a long time after reading that. The box of cable adapters was still open beside me. The faint sweet smell was still there. From above me, through the floor, I could hear the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday afternoon, a car on the street, somewhere the distant sound of the Patel boys' clarinet, carried early because of the heat. I put the journal in my desk drawer, under the warranty cards and old user manuals, and I spent the rest of the evening very carefully not thinking about what I had read. I lasted 4 days before I ran the experiment. Carol the mail carrier came at 11:15 on Monday mornings, with the reliability of a metronome. She was a small woman, early 50s, with short gray hair and forearms tanned from years of driving with the window down. We had a pleasant acquaintance, nothing deep, but consistently warm. She knew I preferred packages at the back door. I had attended her retirement countdown party at the Elrys 2 years ago, at which point she had announced she had 3 more years to go, which suggested she was planning ahead, or perhaps had miscounted. I waited by my front walkway on Monday, September 9th, with a cup of coffee I did not want. When she came up the path with her bag, I said, "Hey, Carol. You heard anything about Helen Marsh? I haven't seen her lately." Helen Marsh was the woman at number 62 who had disappeared. That word kept occurring to me, disappeared, though I kept trying to replace it with left or moved, about 10 days prior. Gone in the night, new occupants by morning. Standard Harlow Creek departure. Carol did not stop walking. She continued up the path at the same pace, reached the mailbox, began inserting the mail, a water bill and 2 catalogs, and the expression on her face was not one I had seen before on a human being. It was not blank, exactly. It was occupied. The way a screen looks when a program is running invisibly, the cursor showing a loading state rather than a frozen error. She was processing something, I thought. Or she was waiting for something to finish processing her. She left without a word. Not a goodbye, not a "have a good one," not even the faint acknowledgement of closing the mailbox flap with the small care she usually took. I stood on my walk holding the cold coffee and watched her go up the street, and I noticed that Sandra Cho had come out onto her porch across the way, and that the Elrys were both in their garden, which they usually weren't at that hour on a Monday, and that Ray Dunleavy's truck was in his driveway, which meant he hadn't gone to his Tuesday through Thursday woodworking class the way he usually did on weeks when I stopped. It was Monday. He went on Tuesdays. I was confusing myself. But Sandra was still on her porch. And the Elrys were still in their garden. And they were all very still. I went inside. After that I could not stop noticing it. I want to be clear, once you have noticed something, you cannot unnotice it, and I am not sure, in retrospect, whether what I began to see was real or whether I had activated some pattern recognition process in myself that would now generate patterns regardless of their accuracy. I want to be honest about that uncertainty. I cannot be objective about my own perception. What I can tell you is what I observed, and you can draw your own conclusions. I observed the following, that when I spoke the name of someone who had left, Jack Morrow, Connie Beaumont, Helen Marsh, and there were neighbors within earshot, those neighbors would, for a period of approximately 2 to 4 seconds, stop whatever they were doing. Not pause. Stop. The difference matters. A pause is biological, organic, something with breath in it. What I saw was mechanical. A cessation. And then the resumption, always accompanied by a smile slightly wider than the one that had preceded it. Just slightly. Not so wide as to look wrong unless you were watching for it. I was watching for it. Ray stopped by on a Wednesday with tomatoes from his garden. Big, heavy beefsteaks, the kind you could slice with a butter knife if you were patient. He set them on my kitchen counter and I made us both coffee, and I watched his face while we talked, and I counted his blinks. He blinked 14 times in 2 minutes. Which is within the normal range. I know it is within the normal range because I looked it up, because I have become the sort of person who looks up human blink rates while sitting in their kitchen watching their best friend eat a tomato. I told myself this meant nothing. I told myself Hart had been paranoid and unwell, had probably experienced some kind of psychotic break, and that I was in danger of following them down the same path if I wasn't careful. I was careful. I counted anyway. 14 blinks. I checked the next day. 11. And the day after that. 13. These are normal numbers. I know they are. But in the moment of counting, they did not feel like enough. I decided on the morning of September 19th that I was going to leave. Not permanently, or at least, I told myself it wasn't permanent, but I needed to get out of the neighborhood, drive to Portland, have a coffee somewhere anonymous and loud, remind myself that the world outside Harlow Creek was still there and still normal and still populated by people whose eyes blinked at ordinary rates. I packed a bag, which was perhaps excessive for a day trip, but I wanted the option of staying somewhere overnight if the drive felt too late coming back. I went to the hook by the back door where I kept my car keys. They were not there. I checked all the places keys go when they are not where they're supposed to be. Counter by the microwave. Bowl on the dresser. Jacket pockets. Pants pockets. The basket by the front door I don't usually use. The bathroom counter, which made no sense but which I checked anyway. I searched for 45 minutes, going through the same locations multiple times with the particular desperation of a person who cannot accept a simple fact, and the simple fact was, my keys were gone. I had not misplaced them. I have a key hook and a habit and I do not misplace my keys. Someone had taken them, or they had ceased to exist. I was not sure which of those options was more frightening. I went to the front door. I thought I would walk to the nearest bus stop, which was 3 blocks north on Harlow Drive, and take a bus to a place with cell service good enough to call a rideshare, because the rideshare apps had always shown limited availability in the creek, poor coverage, the drivers didn't come this far out, something like that. I had never thought to question it before. I opened the front door. They were all there. Not gathered, exactly, that makes it sound deliberate, organized, like a mob or a congregation. They were simply on their lawns. Margaret and Tom in their garden, faces turned toward my house. Sandra on her porch, the glass of iced tea in her hand perfectly still, not sweating, though it was warm. Ray on the edge of his property, at the exact invisible line where his grass met the public sidewalk. The Kims, who had moved into Jack's house, standing side by side in their driveway. The new couple at Connie's old place. All of them. Every house on my section of Birchwood Lane, its occupants present, oriented toward me with the particular attentiveness of an audience. I stood in my doorway and for a moment no one moved and no one spoke and the only sound was the creek somewhere behind the park, moving over its stones, and the pear tree behind me shedding one fruit with a soft and final sound. Ray walked to the edge of his yard. He walked the way he always walked, slowly, a little stiff in the left hip, the way he'd been since a fall 2 winters back. He stopped at the line and looked at me, and his face had the warmth it always had, the warmth that I had taken for kindness for 4 years and was now trying to see clearly for what it actually was, and he said, "You love it here, Daniel. You've always loved it here. You don't want to leave. You know there's nowhere to go from here." His voice was exactly his voice. The same careful baritone. The same way he said my full name. I went back inside. I don't know what else I would have done. I stood in my hallway with my packed bag at my feet, and then I walked to the bathroom because I thought I was going to be sick, and I stood over the sink for a moment, and then I looked up at my own face in the mirror. I've been staring at my own face for 34 years. I know its specific geography, the angle of the jaw, the crookedness of the nose from where I broke it at 15, the particular heaviness around the eyes that comes from my mother's side of the family. I know this face the way you know a place you've lived long enough. In the dark, without thinking. The face in the mirror was mine. I want to be careful about this, because I know how it sounds, and I don't want you to think I'm describing something cinematic or theatrical, something with supernatural clarity. It was my face. But there was something happening at the periphery of it, at the edges of the jaw, along the hairline, in the specific neutral set of the mouth at rest, something that reminded me of someone, and it took me a moment to understand who. It reminded me of Margaret Ellery. And of Ray. And of Sandra. Of all of them. The same calm. The same readiness to smile. The same quality of warmth that required nothing, that expected nothing, that simply radiated like a light source without generating heat. I went to my desk and took out Hart's journal and held it in both hands for a long time. Then I put it in my bag, because it was the only record I had that anyone else had ever felt this, and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I listened. The house was quiet. The house is always quiet at this hour, the neighborhood settles after 9, which is one of the things I had always loved about it, one of the things I had told people about when they asked why I lived so far from the city. It was quiet the way places are quiet when they have been quiet for a long time, when they have absorbed the habit of silence into their walls. I had always understood this as the peace of a well-kept neighborhood. I lay back on the bed with my clothes on and the light still on, and I was listening, and what I heard at first was nothing, and then what I heard was, the house settling, the pipes, the faint percussion of an old structure adjusting to the weight of its own stillness. And then, under that, beneath the settling and the pipes, something else. It started just after midnight. I know because I looked at my phone, 12:07 a.m., September 20th, the screen the only light in the room because I had finally turned the lamp off, told myself I needed to sleep, and then lay in the dark for an hour and a half not sleeping. The sound was at the wall behind the headboard, and then the wall to my left, and then from below, from the floor itself, and it was not a scratching and it was not a settling and it was not any sound that a house makes in the normal course of being a house. It was voices. Muffled by the material between us, layered over each other in a way that made it impossible to separate individual words, but voices. Human voices, reduced to their prosodic shapes, the rising and falling, the pause and the breath, the particular rhythm of people talking to each other in the intimate register of small spaces. I pressed my ear against the wall and closed my eyes and tried to listen past the layering, and what I heard, I am not certain of this, I want to be honest about the limits of my perception, was something with the cadence of Jack Morrow's laugh. The particular rhythm of it. Short, then longer, then a sound at the back of the throat. I had heard that laugh across the street dozens of times in 2 years of neighborly proximity. I would know it anywhere. I would know it if it were coming from inside the walls of a house that had been built in 1987, that sat on a concrete foundation over a basement that smelled faintly and persistently of something sweet. I did not sleep. By 3 a.m. the sounds had receded to the frequency of something I could convince myself was dreaming, and I lay in the gray space between terror and exhaustion, and I thought about what Hart had written. They don't like the emptiness. If you're not part of the landscape, you become fertilizer for it. I thought about Connie Beaumont, who had been so sad after her husband died, who had said once on the porch with her afternoon tea that the neighborhood was the only thing keeping her going. I thought about Jack Morrow, who had stood at his window some evenings and stared at the creek, and who had told me once, very briefly, that he thought he might want to move back to Chicago, and then never mentioned it again. I thought about how long it had been since I had called my mother on a Sunday. I could not remember. I tried to think of the last time and I couldn't locate it. The memory felt like a room I hadn't entered in a long time, the furniture still there but gathered with dust, the function of the space grown vague. I thought about how much I loved this neighborhood. I thought about that love carefully, the way you think about a sensation when you are trying to determine whether it belongs to you or whether it has been applied to you from outside. I am writing this on the morning of September 20th, at my desk by the window, in the early light. The street is quiet. My bag is still packed and sitting by the bedroom door. My keys are still gone. The journal is open beside me, and Hart's handwriting is very small and very careful, and their last entry ends mid-sentence, a sentence about Margaret Ellery, and then nothing. 47 pages of a person, and then nothing. I don't know where Hart is. I have not said their name aloud. I have been very careful not to say their name aloud. I don't know what to do with the information I have. I don't know who I would call, or what I would say, or whether the phone would work the way it should if I tried to make a call to someone outside the creek. I have not tested this. I'm afraid to test this. I am afraid of a lot of things this morning that I was not afraid of this time yesterday, and the difference between the Daniel of yesterday and the Daniel of right now is the knowledge that love can be installed the way software is installed, without your permission, running in the background, consuming resources you didn't know you were spending. The pear tree is dropping its last fruit. I can hear them falling one by one, the soft sound of them, the patient and inevitable sound of something becoming part of the ground. Someone is knocking at my door. They are knocking the way people knock here, 3 times, evenly spaced, the sound of a social call. They knocked at 10 last night too, and I did not answer, and they went away, and now they are back. I can smell something from here, through the door. Something warm and sweet. Lemon. Butter. They are knocking again. Daniel. It's Ray's voice. The same voice, with the same warmth it has always had. We brought a pie. You've been inside all day. We're worried about you, buddy. A pause. The sound of a pie dish being set down on the porch boards. You've been talking too much, I think. That happens sometimes. You get too much in your head. It's okay. Another pause. When he speaks again, his voice is exactly as kind as it has ever been, perhaps kinder. Come have some pie with us. It's time to be quiet for a while, Daniel. It's time to be part of things. I am not going to open the door. I am writing this instead, and I am going to post it, and I am asking you, whoever you are, wherever you are, to read it and to understand that I am at 47, Birchwood Lane, Harlow Creek, and that I have not left this neighborhood in 4 years, and that I do not know how long I have left before I stop noticing that this is strange. Before the face in my mirror finishes settling into the face that belongs here. Before the sound in the walls becomes the sound of my own voice, layered into the wood, becoming part of the house, becoming part of the quiet that everyone in this neighborhood keeps so carefully, so lovingly, so completely. They are still outside. I can hear them waiting. They are very patient. They have always been very patient. The pie smells incredible.